My name is Captain Marlene, and last night I stole my grandfather from my father's house with a grocery bag of pills, a wool coat that wasn't warm enough, and an envelope I left on the kitchen table like a silent bomb. If that sounds criminal, it felt righteous. I didn't run. I walked him past the snow shovel, propped like a sentinel, down the crooked porch steps my father never fixed, and into my truck. The porch light burned behind us, a yellow eye that had watched too many arguments and never blinked. Grandpa didn't look back. He squeezed my arm, dry palm shaking, and said, "Keys." I put the seat warmer on high and said, "Buckle up." We pulled away slow, no tires squealing, just the hush of new snow over old gravel. The envelope stayed behind, waiting like truth under a lampshade. Now I'll tell you how we got there. It started with the sentence, "You don't come back from the kind that shuts doors without touching the knob." My father stood by the sink sleeves, rolled forearms, roped with veins, and said, "You're just a burden here." He said it to me. Not whispered in a corner, not buried in a sigh, he said it clean. Sober, deliberate, with a coffee mug in his hand, and a calendar full of nothing behind him. Grandpa turned away, like a man ducking a slow punch. He needed both hands to steady himself on the counter, but he pretended to adjust the radio. I caught the shine in his eyes before he hit it. That hurt worse than the sentence. I'd come home for a stretch 2 months, maybe 3, while the VA figured out what to call the mess in my knee and shoulder. It was supposed to be temporary. I slept in my old room under a pennant from a team that doesn't exist anymore, and the map of the Appalachian Trail. Grandpa and I traced with yarn when I was 12. I cooked when I could, drove Grandpa to appointments when my father said he had work a loop of errands that never produced receipts. I stacked the wood. I paid what I could. I stayed quiet until quiet became permission. The house looked the same until you looked twice, the frames dusted, but empty of new pictures, the sink scrubbed, but coughing metal, the furnace timer, blinking 12 hours like a ship lost at sea. Grandpa's chair lived by the window, close enough to the radiator for his knees. He loved that chair. My father had dragged a second recliner beside it, his throne, and parked the remote there like a badge. That afternoon, the snow came in, mean and sideways. I made soup. Grandpa watched the weather and named back roads like old friends. My father arrived late, loud, complaining about salt prices and taxes and whatever would keep him from touching the real thing. He didn't sit. He circled. I ladled soup into bowls. I put the good spoon by Grandpa because small mercies are still mercies. Then my father found the stack of hospital receipts on the counter and pinched them like they were hot. "Why are these here?" "So we don't lose them," I said. He fanned the papers like a deck of cheap cards. "You think I don't take care of things." "I think they needed paying," I said. I shouldn't have. Or maybe I should have said it a month earlier. It's hard to time the truth. He didn't explode. He cooled. "That's worse. You're just a burden here." Winter deciding to stay. Grandpa made a sound, something between a sigh and a choke. He turned his face to the window and watched the street lamps come on early. I washed the bowls. I dried my hands slow. Then I walked to the study and opened the bottom drawer where the farm papers lived, yellow deeds, survey maps, tax slips with Grandpa's handwriting tucked like stitches in the corners. I took what I needed and sealed it into an envelope. Thick paper. My name on the front. Another envelope already lay in my truck ready. Redundancy saves lives and lawsuits. Back in the kitchen, I slid the envelope onto the table. The old wood had a burn mark from when Grandpa taught me to solder. The envelope covered the scar like a bandage. My father watched me do it. "What is that?" "Clarity," I said. "You always liked riddles," he said, reaching for it. "Don't I said?" He froze. Not because he feared me, because he knew I meant it. I put on Grandpa's coat, buttoned it all the way to the throat, wrapped his scarf the way Grandma used to, one cross, one tuck. He stood obediently, a tall boy, once now slimmed down to the truth of himself. He'd taught me how to pack a ruck, how to read a map, how to read a face. He looked up at me, and for a half breath, he was my commander again, giving the nod to move. "We're going," he asked. "We're going," I said. My father laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. "You're not taking him out in that weather." "I'm taking him home," I said. "This is his home." Grandpa's voice was low, but it cut through everything. Not anymore. We moved. The old boots by the door whispered against the mat. I tucked Grandpa's pills in a grocery bag. I took his shaving kit and the little framed photo of him and Grandma at the county fair in '63, the one where she's wearing the red dress and he's pretending not to smile. I left the fishing rods. Some things you can't carry in a storm. At the threshold, my father tried a different tone, the soft sell. Mara, be reasonable. I'm underwater here. The taxes, the appointments, the driving. You make it all heavier. I make it real, I said. The wind found us when I opened the door, slapped our cheeks pink. Snow flew in sideways. I put my shoulder under Grandpa's and we stepped into the night like we'd trained for it. The porch light hummed. The plow crawled down Birch Street 2 blocks over. Somewhere a dog barked and stopped. The world makes room for decisions sometimes. It did for us. In the truck, the heater on full, I looked at Grandpa's hands. Brown spots knuckles like knotted rope nails, squared and clean. He'd built half the neighborhood's decks for beer, and thanks back when the tools felt light. I could still see sawdust in the cracks of his wedding ring. He watched the rearview mirror until the house vanished, and then he kept watching, like you do when you don't trust the past to stay put. We didn't speak for 10 minutes. The wipers kept time. Finally, he said, "Should have said something." "You shouldn't have had to," I said. He nodded once. "He's not mean," Grandpa said after a while. "He's tired of being disappointed. That's a kind of meanness, I guess." "You're not a disappointment," I said. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The miles did it for him. My apartment isn't much. Second floor over a laundromat that runs its dryers too hot. The hallway smells like detergent and old carpet, but it's warm, and the windows lock, and nobody says the word burden unless they're talking about a literal weight. I settled Grandpa into my old reading chair with the good back support and warmed milk on the stove. He fell asleep before I brought it to him. I stared at the ceiling until the radiator clanked 3 times. Somewhere between the second and the third, I remembered the envelope on the table. I pictured my father finding it, tearing it open, seeing the copies of the deeds and the bank letters, and the notarized note Grandpa signed last spring when the arguments began. I pictured his face harden, then blanch. I pictured him counting, calculating, calling. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like a map I should have unfolded earlier. When I finally slept, it was the heavy kind, the kind where you don't dream because you're too empty for it. Morning came like a bright slap. 11 missed calls before I swung my legs out of bed. 8 more while I boiled the kettle. 19 total stacked like fence posts. My phone buzzed with a final message. "We need to talk about the land." Of course we did. The first thing I did was turn the phone face down on the counter, like it was leaking something I didn't want in my coffee. Grandpa was already awake, sitting at the table in his undershirt, reading the label on a cereal box, like it was an intelligence briefing. He had his glasses low on his nose and a pencil tucked behind his ear. When he saw me, he smiled. Not the polite smile you give a stranger, but the tired, warm one that says you made it through another night. "You sleep?" I asked. "Better than I have in years," he said, tapping the box. "These people want me to believe honey clusters is a real food group." I laughed despite the knot in my stomach. The calls weren't going to stop. My father didn't call 19 times out of affection. He called 19 times because he realized too late that I hadn't just walked out with Grandpa. I'd walked out with something that mattered to him, more than family dinners and Christmas photos combined. The envelope. While Grandpa poured cereal, I slipped into the bedroom and pulled my own copy out of the drawer. I'd made it on the same night I'd made his. Insurance. Inside were brittle property tax receipts, a yellowed survey map, and at the very bottom, a folded deed. The paper was stiff with age edges, frayed Grandpa's name, written in a clerk's looping hand from 40 years ago. I hadn't had time to read it before last night. Now I did. And what I saw didn't match the story my father had been telling for years. The land, 32 acres along the river outside town, wasn't the family's. It was Grandpa's. Legally. He'd never signed it over, never split it. And the kicker? It had never been mortgaged. I found him at the sink rinsing his bowl. "Tell me about the river land," I said. He dried his hands slowly, like a man stalling for time. Was my father's before it was mine. Good soil, terrible winters. After the highway came through, everyone figured it wasn't worth much. But that river, he shook his head. You can't buy a river. So why keep it, I asked. For something better than money? His eyes met mine. I figured one day you might need a place no one could take from you. I swallowed. Dad's going to want it. He's been wanting it for 10 years, Grandpa said, moving to the window. He's got plans, loud plans. Hotels, fishing charters, golf carts rolling where the deer bed down. The picture formed sharp in my mind, the quiet bend in the river, replaced by neon signs and parking lots. A place where veterans used to fish, turned into a weekend brochure for people who'd never set foot in town. I was about to ask more when my phone buzzed again face down. I didn't need to see the name. I let it buzz out. Then another call, same number, and another. Grandpa tilted his head. Persistent, isn't he? I nodded. It's not going to stop. He left the window, sat across from me. When you were 8, you brought home a stray dog from the park. Mangy thing smelled like it crawled through a swamp. Lucy, I said. Your father told you to take it back. You didn't. You washed it in the tub, fed it scraps, slept on the floor with it. Sometimes you just have to keep what's worth keeping, no matter how loud someone yells to get rid of it. The image stuck. A dog with ribs showing curled on a towel while I guarded the bathroom door. I'd done it without thinking, just knew it was the right thing. That's when I decided the envelope wasn't a threat. It was a signal. I spent the next hour calling around. First, the county records office. They confirmed what I'd already read, the deed was still active, Grandpa's name, still first. Then a stop at the municipal building to check zoning changes. Nothing finalized yet, but a few preliminary inquiries had been made by an LLC I didn't recognize. The clerk didn't have to tell me who was behind it. On the way back, I swung by a corner store for milk and found a note under my truck's wiper. My father's handwriting. 3 words, "You'll regret this." I crumpled it without reading it twice. Back home, Grandpa was in my recliner with the news on low. He muted it when I came in. Find what you needed. Yeah, I said, setting the milk down. And we're not selling. He smiled, slow and tired. Didn't think we were. That night, while the wind rattled the windows, I lay awake thinking about the land. Not just as acres and boundaries, but as a place that had somehow survived every bad idea thrown at it. Maybe it could survive this too if I held the line. But I knew holding it wouldn't be quiet. And judging by those 19 missed calls, the noise was just getting started. The county records office smelled like floor wax, an old paper 2 cents that always meant someone was keeping track of things the rest of us forgot. The clerk, a man in his 70s with a buzz cut you could set a level on, peered over his glasses as I slid the deed across the counter. Well, he said, turning it in his hands like a rare coin. Haven't seen this name in a long while. Your grandfather's still kicking. More than some, I said. He chuckled. I remember him. Navy right, tough as nails. Bought this parcel back in '82, kept it tax current even when folks said it wasn't worth the postage. Guess he knew something the rest of us didn't. I leaned in. What's it worth now? He scratched his chin. With the new highway exit, developers would pay a premium. But it's more than money, it's a slice of the last clean riverfront we got. That word clean stuck with me. When I got back to the truck, I found Grandpa watching traffic like he was keeping count of the red sedans. Well, he asked. It's still yours, I said. And they want it bad. His jaw tightened. Figured as much. Your dad's been sniffing around that property like a hound on a fox trail. I started the engine. Why didn't you tell me? He sighed. Didn't want to drag you into another fight. You've had enough of those in uniform. This one's different, I said. It's ours. On the way back, we stopped at a diner off Route 12 for pie. The waitress, a redhead with a voice like a gravel road, poured our coffee and leaned on the counter. You two headed out to the river for the thaw. Maybe, Grandpa said. Better hurry. Heard the county's looking to revitalize that whole stretch. Which is fancy talk for paving it over and charging you to park. Grandpa's eyes met mine over the coffee steam. We didn't need to say it. My father's shadow was long and busy. That evening, after I settled Grandpa with a crossword, I called an old friend from high school. Casey was now a city planner, the kind who knew which projects were whispers and which were already done deals. She picked up on the second ring. "Mara, it's been forever. Casey, I need to ask about the riverfront permits." She was quiet for a beat. "Can't tell you everything conflict of interest, but I can tell you some folks are already drawing blueprints. The LLC on the paperwork, I'd bet my next paycheck it's your father's." That confirmed it. He hadn't just been dreaming about selling. He'd been working the angles. Before bed, I made tea and sat across from Grandpa at the kitchen table. If we keep it, I said we have to make it more than a piece of land. Something no one can argue is a waste. He studied me over his glasses. "What are you thinking?" "I'm not sure yet, but I know it's not going to be a golf course." He smirked. "Good. I hate golf." We sat there in the hum of the refrigerator, the air thick with the unspoken. My phone lit up on the counter, another call from my father. I didn't pick up. Let him talk to the dial tone. The next morning, Grandpa had a dizzy spell in the kitchen. He caught himself on the counter, but the tremor in his hands stayed. I bundled him into the truck and drove straight to the VA hospital. In the waiting room, Casey texted, "Permits could go through in months if no one objects." I looked over at Grandpa, sitting with his coat folded in his lap, watching a muted TV show about fishing. He didn't seem frail to me, just worn in the way a good pair of boots is worn. But I knew time was a resource we didn't have a surplus of. That night, after soup and aspirin, Grandpa leaned back in the recliner. "They'll try to scare you into signing," he said. "Don't let them." "I won't," I said. He closed his eyes. "Good. That land's not for sale. It's for something else." I didn't know what that something else was yet, but I could feel it forming quiet, solid, inevitable, like the ground freezing before the first snow. The first voicemail that morning was almost polite. "Mara, it's your mother. Call us back when you get this. Your father's worried." By the 5th, the varnish was gone. "You don't know what you've started. We can fix this if you just come over and talk without him." By the 10th, it was just noise threats wrapped in family language. I didn't listen past the first few seconds. Grandpa was at the table again, sipping coffee so slowly it looked like a tactical maneuver. "They're circling," he said, nodding at my phone. "Let them," I said. The 11th call came from a number I didn't recognize. I picked up. "This is Mark Davison, counsel for your father. We need to discuss the deed you removed from his home." "Removed from his home," I said. "Funny. The deed doesn't have his name on it." "Let's meet," he said. "We can resolve this without making it ugly." Ugly was already here. We met that afternoon at a diner halfway between my apartment and the farm. Mark wore a suit that cost more than my truck's transmission, and he smiled like it was a professional hazard. "This is an opportunity for you," he said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside was a buyout offer more money than I'd seen in one place, but nowhere near what the land was worth. "Keep the peace in the family," he said. "Your father's under a lot of stress." I closed the folder. "Stress doesn't entitle you to someone else's property." His smile thinned. "You've been spending a lot of time with your grandfather. Given his age, people could assume you're influencing him." I leaned in. "People could also assume I know how to file a restraining order." That ended the meeting. Back home, Grandpa was sorting through a box of old photos. He handed me one him in uniform, standing on a dock water, stretching out behind him. "That's the river," he said. 84. "I was telling your grandma it could be more than just land. A place where the boys from town could come fish, stay a night, remember, they weren't alone." I turned the photo over. On the back, in his blocky handwriting, "For the retreat." "You were serious," I said. "Still am," he said. "Problem is I never had someone to build it with me." "Your dad? Well, you've seen how he thinks." That night, I made calls. First to a veterans nonprofit 2 towns over. Then to a grant officer I'd met at a Memorial Day ceremony years back. The idea took shape faster than I expected: cabins, a dock, maybe a small hall for gatherings. All on land no developer could touch once it was in trust. When I told Grandpa, his eyes lit the way I'd only seen once before when I came home from my first deployment. The calls from my parents didn't slow. They shifted tone. My mother's voice turned pleading, my father's turned sharp enough to cut glass. "You'll regret this," he said in one message. "We can make life very hard for you." I hit delete. The trust paperwork would take a week. Until then, the land was still a live wire, and my father was the type who liked to cut wires before they could spark. 2 days later, the knock came like a command, 3 sharp raps spaced just far enough apart to let you know the person on the other side wasn't going away. I opened the door to find my father standing there in his heavy winter coat jaw, set eyes scanning the apartment like he was already making an inventory of what to take back. "Get your coat," he said. "We're going home." "I am home," I said. His gaze flicked past me. "Dad, grab your things. We're leaving." Grandpa appeared behind me, leaning on the doorframe with his cane. His voice was calm, almost conversational. "I know exactly where I am, and I'm staying." "Don't do this," my father said. "You're confused." "Not as confused as you are," Grandpa cut in, "thinking you can sell blood like it's a spare car." My father's eyes narrowed, and for a second I saw the boy. He must have been angry, defensive, terrified of being told no. "You're poisoning him against me," he said to me. I stepped forward. "He doesn't need me to tell him who you are." That's when I pulled the manila envelope from the counter and handed it to him. He tore it open right there, his breath frosting in the doorway. Inside was the notice of the charitable trust. My signature and Grandpa's, the mission statement for the Veterans Retreat, and the clause that locked the land from any sale without our joint consent. He read it twice. His face moved through disbelief, then calculation, then something colder. "You think this is permanent?" he said. "It's as permanent as the river," I said. Grandpa's voice was steady. "Land can be bought, blood can't. And you sold yours a long time ago." The air between us froze harder than the street outside. My father stuffed the papers back into the envelope like he was shoving the words back down my throat. "You'll regret this," he said, stepping back. I didn't answer. He turned, boots crunching on the salt-dusted sidewalk, and didn't look back. When the door closed, Grandpa let out a slow breath. "That's done." "Not yet," I said. "People like him don't stop when the door shuts. They just find another one to open." Sure enough, the next day I got a letter from his lawyer, threatening legal action to dissolve the trust. It was all teeth and no bite. Gregory Thorne, a contact from the Veterans nonprofit, confirmed the paperwork was ironclad. Still, I knew the real battle wasn't on paper. It was in the way people talk, the way stories get told, until truth is just one more version. And my father was a man who loved to control the version. The only way to beat that was to build something so real, so present, that no one could argue it was wasted. The retreat had to happen, and fast. The retreat started as sketches on my kitchen table, pencil lines over coffee rings, sticky notes with half-legible words like dock access and bunkhouse plumbing. Grandpa sat across from me, watching as if I were drawing a battle plan. "You're missing the fire pit," he said, tapping the edge of the page. "We can add it," I said. "You will add it," he replied, like it was an order. I didn't have money for cabins or docks yet, but I had people. The Veterans nonprofit sent a project manager who knew grant applications like a second language. Casey, my city planner friend, volunteered to help navigate the zoning process and, more importantly, file objections to any development permits my father's LLC tried to push through. Still, I knew he wouldn't just vanish. He proved me right 4 days later when he showed up again. No knock this time, just a shadow through the frosted glass of my apartment door, then his voice. "Let's talk." I opened it halfway enough for him to see I wasn't alone. Grandpa was in the recliner, pen in hand, signing a donation form. "You don't have to do this," my father said to him. "Neither do you," Grandpa answered without looking up. My father's eyes moved to me. "This is your doing, and you'll undo it." I stepped into the doorway. "No, Dad. This is the one thing I'm not undoing." His jaw twitched. "You're making enemies you can't afford." I thought of deployments where I'd stood between armed men and villages with no walls. I can afford it. He left after that, but not before tossing a parting shot over his shoulder. "You've chosen him over your own family." The door clicked shut behind him. Grandpa's pen kept moving. "Guess he forgot I'm family too," he said. We filed the final trust paperwork the next day, turning the land into something no developer could touch without both our signatures. That same afternoon, I called a local reporter I trusted and pitched the story not as a family feud, but as the start of a veterans' retreat built on donated land. The article went live 2 days later. Headline, Riverfront Gifted for Veterans Haven by Local Family. My father's name was nowhere in it. Mine and Grandpa's were in the first paragraph. That night, the phone stayed quiet. No calls, no threats. Just the sound of winter settling in outside my window and Grandpa humming low as he drew the fire pit exactly where he wanted it. The ground broke in April when the frost finally surrendered and the river's edge turned soft under our boots. We didn't have much, 2 contractors working at a discount, a handful of volunteers from the VFW, and enough grant money for the first cabin and a dock. But standing there with a shovel in my hand and Grandpa leaning on his cane beside me, it felt like more than enough. This is the hard part, I told him. He smirked. Kid, the hard part was raising your father. We laughed, and it carried over the water. By summer, the dock stretched out like a promise, and the first cabin had a roof. Veterans started showing up just to walk the grounds as if the place was already breathing. One brought his grandson to fish. Another just sat by the water for an hour, then shook my hand without saying a word. On the last Friday in August, we held the opening ceremony. No speeches from politicians, no ribbon cutting for cameras, just 37 folding chairs in a half circle, a flag on a simple pole, and the sound of the river moving past. I spoke for 5 minutes. This land was almost sold to strangers who would have paved it over. Now it's a place for the ones who serve for the ones who came home, and the ones still finding their way back. My grandfather dreamed it. I just had the sense to listen. When I finished, Grandpa stood and saluted. His hand shook, but his eyes didn't. That night, we sat on the cabin porch, the air warm and smelling of pine. The river whispered below us. You saved it, he said. We saved it, I corrected. He nodded, then looked out toward the dark water. When I'm gone, promise me you'll keep it the way it is. No monuments, no gates, just open. I promise. We stayed there until the moon rose high, talking about nothing and everything. I thought of the first night I brought him here, the 19 missed calls, the threats, the way the word burden had burned through me. Now it felt distant, like a fight in another lifetime. Some people inherit money, some inherit land. I inherited a reason to keep showing up and a place to do it. If you've been listening, maybe you've got a place like that too. Or maybe you've been meaning to make one. Don't wait. Show up for it now. And if this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to remember that not all legacies are written in wills. This is Love Storytelling Channel, and we tell the stories no one else will. Subscribe if you're still here. It means you were meant to be.